This is my presentation for Greek and Roman Studies 341, Rome's Empire. The title is Constantine's Vision, Conversion, and the Beginnings of a Christian Empire. This is our itinerary for the next several minutes. I've punctuated this presentation into exactly 10 sections. The course of this discussion is to weave together a story about who the Emperor Constantine was from the lens of our modernly scholarly discussions. In the course of this discussion, I will aim to provide something for you viewers as a sort of interesting takeaway about the Roman Empire, if such generalizations are possible. If that's not the case, then rather I hope that we can all be satisfied with at least learning some things about the empire. While I've broken down this discussion into 10 sections, I should point out that in the way that it has been formatted, the point of which has not been made to set an agenda about the character of Constantine, but should be seen as more of the point of departure that has been made in my attempt at an interwoven story from a selection of 5 primary sources and what has come off from my reviewing of our scholarly sources. The question of this presentation that I will be addressing is how the Roman Empire became a Christian empire. And my story centers on the figure of Constantine to uncover how this historically pagan empire became Christian. Just to start off with some biographical details of Constantine, he was born in 272 AD and died in 337 AD. So he lived for about 65 years. Almost half of his life was spent as the Emperor of Rome. After his death, the church recognized him as a saint, Saint Constantine, and the Eastern churches hailed him as the 13th apostle. So what can be said for his legacy stretches far beyond the reaches of what I have to say, but I will mention at least one thing here. Really, in the Middle Ages, he was regarded as a sort of ideal ruler. This phenomenon is not just seen with Constantine alone, and it happens in all sorts of ways, but and not just with emperors, but in the Middle Ages, at least, this idea that he was seen as an ideal ruler would have had traction because Christian doctrine was predominantly the accepted standard of thought, and Constantine embodied this sort of Christ-like image or image of Christ for being the first Christian emperor of Rome, and of course having a lasting impact in the history of Christianity. Of course, this also had to do with other reasons as well. But as mentioned, I just want to bear in mind this interesting part of his legacy as a saint, and the idea that things from the past acquire a kind of romanticization of how great they were and how they are, how they were better than things are now because of their distance from this more distinct present condition. Kind of like the way of how Hesiod imagined the Golden Age. And in the process of civilization leading up to the now, things tend to disintegrate from this ideal state. So things that have passed acquire an idealized memory. On the top we have a fresco painting from the mid-16th century. This is located in the Apostolic Palace, Vatican City. It's probably a digitally remastered image. The bottom left is a Greek Orthodox icon of Constantine. In the center bottom is Saint Constantine and Saint Helen, his mother, pictured together. And on the bottom right, we have a statue that was unveiled in 1998 in York to commemorate Constantine and his ascension as the Roman emperor. And it's placed here because of York was the place place where his father Constantius Chlorus had taken place. Just some things about the tetrarchy. So it's a monarchical system that divided the empire into two senior emperors, the Augusti, and their two juniors as designated successors, the Caesars. So this endured until July 306 with the death of Constantius, Constantine's father, and Constantine was acclaimed as Augustus and Caesar by his father's legions. In the West, Maxentius and Constantine were both recognized as Augusti by Maximian, who was previously Caesar but then appointed as Augusti with the passing of Constantius. And the situation is different in the East, but for Constantine, his victory over Maxentius at the Battle of the Melvin Bridge in 312 left him with control over the entire Western Empire. So for the first persecutions of Christians were organized by the Roman, that had been organized by the Roman government, had taken place under the Emperor Nero in 64 AD after the Great First Fire of Rome, as possibly a backlash against Christians for having caused the fire, but this is uncertain. Prior to the Edict of Toleration, Christians within the empire had been subjected to varying levels of persecution, but during that period, which was about 3 centuries, the Roman Empire had exercised its authority to rescind the rights of Christians. Most likely this kind of policy was to encourage Roman citizens to continue the worship of pagan deities and worship in the imperial cults. But this was obviously made through dissuasion. What happens when the Edict of Toleration is issued is that the persecution of Christians is, for the most part, ceased, if not entirely. There were still religious tensions after the edict that eventually attenuated, but it is present for us in but it presents for us, the edict presents for us an indication that the empire eventually did start to exercise its authority to provide protection to Christians. This can be viewed as an active movement to undo the suppression of rights that had been previously placed onto Christian subjects of the Roman Empire. And then with the Edict of Milan in 313, Christianity became legalized across the entire empire. Here I will note a number of key features to suggest what kind of authority the Roman Empire saw itself to be in regards to Christian subjects within the empire, but also its attitude towards the empire at large. and why we might want to view these two edicts as policy that became pivotal, a pivotal turning point to the Christianization of Rome. The first key part is an aspect of paternalism. Both edicts use specific language about Rome's position towards its Christian subjects and the Roman people at large, with having their best interests in mind. For example, in the Edict of Milan, the freedoms and liberties granted to the Christians were, quote, were made by, quote, considering everything that pertained to the public welfare and security, end quote, or more straightforwardly as, quote, for the good of many, end quote. The second key part is reciprocity. In both documents, we can pick up on this strand at a number of different levels. In the Edict of Toleration, for example, the overall feel and quality that can be gathered from the text is that the end of persecution of Christians is presented as a movement within the empire for the harmony of the empire. And at the end of the edict, we see as an authority, Rome as an authority, it asks of its Christian subjects to, quote, pray to their gods for our safety, end quote, in return for Rome removing the persecution laws. A similar sentiment to this is echoed in the Edict of Milan with its petition that the edict would bring, quote, divine favor towards us, end quote. Overall, this aspect of reciprocity suggests that Roman authority identified a certain appeal in the unique faith of the Christians for the empire or for the good of the empire. And so this is embedded into the very language of the edicts, and it actually lends nicely to the idea that the relationship between Rome and its Christian subjects could have potential influence beyond the end of persecution and civil discord that was present in the empire, but also in furthering the prosperity of the empire and having a deeper sense of harmony within the empire. Here's a just some snippets of the translated version of the Edict of Milan, which legalized Christianity. It also had declared property titles that had been revoked during the persecution, and that they would be restored. And at the end of this edict, we have stated, let this be done so that, as we have said before, divine favor towards us, which under the most important circumstances we have already experienced, may for all time preserve and prosper our successes together with the good of the state. Okay, so what did Constantine see? He had this, he is claimed to have had this strange vision, and we're going to dive into that here. This is again the vision of the cross painting in the Apostolic Palace. You can see how the fresco is actually situated in the building here. Okay, so I want to bring to your attention this article called Visions of Constantine by Richard Flower. What Flower wants to do in this article is to bypass the problem of interpretive difference that exists in describing what Constantine actually saw by more profitably looking at the questions being asked in reconstructing an interpretation of this emperor and his policies, he argues that the divide in scholarship in the the and who Constantine was, or the various versions of who Constantine was, are not at heart concerns about conversion, sincerity, or beliefs of the emperor, but rather come about from the ideas about the role of emperor in the later Roman world. This is due to the difficulties of actually gaining a clear picture of what his vision actually was, what Constantine's vision actually was. Um, but two different historical accounts are available to us. One from Lactantius, who was an advisor to Constantine, and Eusebius, who was a biographer of the emperor. Lots of ink, I should say, has been spilt over the interpretive value and validity of either of these sources, and Flower has done well to review these various renditions that scholars have pieced together using this evidence to describe the emperor. But what matters for the most part here is not really the contents of that discussion, because no one version that we are given has claims to being more legitimate than the other, as we will see. But what does matter for the sake of interest of what has been described, however, is that Lactantius's account was written about 3 years after the Battle of the Milvian Bridge, which was the decisive battle of Constantine's victory against Maxentius. And when he was claimed to have had this vision, according to Lactantius, and it says that it was a dream that came to Constantine, and so the account says that it was a dream that came to Constantine the night before the battle, which commanded him to delineate the heavenly sign, the Chi-Rho, onto the shields of his soldiers, whereas in Eusebius's account, which was written much later, about 2 decades after the Battle of the Milvian Bridge, says that Constantine and his entire army had seen a cross shape in the sky, much like the fresco painting in the last slide. The suggestion among scholars is that Eusebius's account is an exaggerated version of what actually happened, and by all means we could probably all see that, but that this account and its exaggeration was due to the large period of time between this divine command which Constantine received and the time the account was written. It's also worth mentioning that Eusebius might have only met Constantine a handful of times, whereas it seems that Lactantius had probably spent more time with the emperor. Okay, and then there's this anecdotal piece of evidence that appears as an anonymous formal public address of the emperor that was delivered in 310, which Flower also includes in his paper. And so he says what it describes is that he had turned off from the road to visit the most beautiful temple in the world and was greeted by a remarkable sight. For you saw, I believe, Constantine, your Apollo, accompanied by Victory, offering you laurel crowns, which each brought an omen of 30 years of life or rule. So again, to reiterate the on the contention of what Constantine saw, Flowers sees it now that there is a split in the interpretation of Constantine's religious policy that rests in the frame within which they view the emperor and his Christianity. He solemnly concludes that at the heart, what really distinguishes all these different versions of Constantine are not their reconstructions of his conversion, sincerity, or belief, but their ideas about the role of the emperor in the later world. So he doesn't offer anything he doesn't offer anything conclusively about what Constantine saw, rather the direction of how we approach the question of what he saw for our scholarship. So, okay, what we have really are two theories of his vision: the one vision and two vision theory. In the one vision theory, all three sources describe the same event from different angles. Lactantius incorrectly places the vision before the Battle of the Milvian Bridge in 312 AD, and Eusebius records an embellished, more exaggerated version of Constantine in the one vision theory version, and then in the two vision theory, the two version accepts that Constantine's vision of Apollo came to him first, but then secondly, it was in a dream the night before the Battle of the Milvian Bridge, where he received divine orders that gave him the vision to have his soldiers paint the Chi-Rho symbol onto their shields. So the one vision account dismisses the anecdotal piece of evidence, whereas the two vision includes it, and then of course the revisions about the mistakes in Lactantius's account and Eusebius's account. So it would be with great difficulty to get an exact account, but something like the two version theory might be more likely, because dreams are very common. They very commonly do happen and can be just as profound as visions, although the latter happen rather infrequently. There is also a naturalist account that is out there and describes what Constantine saw as being a solar halo. It's also important too that these dreams and visions, which were seen as encounters with the divine and having divine significance, that having been taken through this process of having encounters with the divine, Constantine could have very well understood the Christian god to be the solar god, or Apollo, as it's sometimes has been described, or as we will see later, Sol Invictus. So this is important because ancient myth is what was relied upon and these deity figures were relied upon to explain occurrences in the natural world. Um, and and myth was their source for understanding the world that they lived in. Okay, so conversion. Um, so the evidence of a miraculous conversion event is virtually non-existent. But what is interesting to note is what scholar Timothy Barnes has to say about Constantine's visit to Babylon in 298. Um, he says basically that it implies well before these sorts of religious visions and the battle in 312 that Constantine had an interest in the Old Testament, so the origins of Christianity, in other words. And on this trip, he would have been about 26. So sometimes the so-called conversion of Constantine has been compared to St. Paul's conversion on the road to Damascus. This would be an appropriate comparison in the proportion of the kind of effect or impact the conversion would have, but also in their content. There is both a vision of light and hearing voices. And the course of St. Paul's life has been dramatically routed after this event. So he had an active involvement in the persecution of Christians, and thereafter, having had his vision, he became a follower of Jesus. The dates of this are somewhere between 334 to 37 AD. And I mean, if we look at Constantine and the sort of coincidences that happen, the course of his life could definitely be seen as dramatically changed in some respects. So also some more interesting features of this conversion is the correspondence that can be made to the Gospel of Matthew, where Jesus prophesies that then will appear the sign of the Son of Man in heaven, and then all the peoples of the earth will mourn when they see the Son of Man coming on the clouds of heaven with power and great glory. This is from the NIV Bible, so there is some interpretation of Constantine as a second coming of Christ. These kinds of interpretations are what are known as eschatological interpretations. This paper that I have here is an article titled Constantine's Vision of the Cross by Oliver Nicholson. There are more reiterations of the same sort of prophetic imagery with light and receiving divine revelation. Here are just a few other instances of it in the Apocalypse of Peter and the Apocalypse of Elijah. Both were written in the 2nd century, although the dates for the writing of the I think it's the Apocalypse of Elijah are contestable. It could have been much later, but by how much I'm not sure. And it's not really clear as to the approximate link between these writings and Constantine himself. The least we know is his general interest in Christianity or his supposed general interest in Christianity from an early point in life. I will read the second one from the Apocalypse of Elijah, which says, "When the Christ comes, he will come like a brood of doves, with his crown of doves surrounding him, as he traverses the cloud of heaven with the sign of the cross going before him. So Nicholson also shows that in the mid-4th century, before baptism, Christians were actually told that they could expect that the sign of a luminous cross shall go before the king. So the image of Christ as this light image and the foretelling of Christ's second coming would have been disseminated quite widely among Christian circles at this time. I think that Nicholson has some great reflections on this, if we just go with him for a bit. But if we take away this idea of an actual moment of conversion, we can still get the same effects of his reflections, because he's in favor of an actual conversion event, which is fine. It's just that it's not really written about that much in our sources. So the second out of the two quotes here is more illuminating. He says, "The vision of the cross assured Constantine that he was the agent of a higher power, a power which ordered history through recognizable patterns of chronology and prophecy. But this was something more than an intimate conversion, a moment of psychological conviction about Christianity in general." We could ignore the last point if we don't like it, but that a psychological conviction about Christianity, we can imagine, would have been quite a very real and very astonishing kind of realization for someone like Constantine. But we cannot just assume this. So I suppose that for anyone, for that matter, who suppose that the divine had some sort of role in the course of events and patterning of the natural world, receiving any divine revelation or command would have had a profound psychological impact. So there is another really great article written by T.G. Eliot, which takes up the position of no alleged conversion. He says, even if he had made several obscure references to, he's talking about like Eusebius's writings regarding a conversion moment for Constantine. He says, even if he had made several obscure references to it, the mystery of why he said nothing would only be exchanged for the mystery of why he said so little, and that the behavior of Constantine the convert is in fact inexplicable. So these are set at different points, but they're it's kind of interesting how on the one end he is sort of almost we would say coming in hard-nosed, taking a hard-nosed approach to a conversion experience, and then also accepting this sort of feeling of seeing the behavior of Constantine as a Christian convert, for the fact that he takes the behavior of Constantine the converted as an inexplicable is kind of telling of just how tricky it is to navigate these topics. To describe someone's behavior as inexplicable does not really give a clear picture of what that behavior entails. It does the exact opposite, and actually it makes it quite mysterious, because we cannot give an explanation as to why they are doing what they are doing. I really do think that he is being somewhat ironic uh, here in this paper, while still trying to make the point that we just don't have evidence for Constantine's conversion. If you look at his argumentation, he argues for a rejection of the conversion not because it is not completely conclusive, but on the basis of whether it can provide a better explanation of the evidence than the evidence of what he calls the conservative approach. And he says conservative because he is kind of, he's being ironic. What he has done is to look at the evidence that would lead us to consider that Constantine had a conversion at some point, but evidence lacks a proper testimonial of to a conversion. So whereas overall it is much less bold, he says, to accept his account of a lack of conversion. And that was the slide that I missed. So, okay, was Constantine a henotheist? So a definition for henotheism is where a henotheist is what it is a belief in one supreme or specially venerated God who is not the only God. And the coin in the background here depicts the image of Sol Invictus, the deity that we that has been suggested that Constantine had that Constantine was associated with, and he's next to Constantine in the coin, and this could have stressed his status as his father's successor. His father, Constantinus, was a pagan and I guess associated with the god Sol Invictus. And so Sol Invictus was a sun god who had adopted characteristics from the earlier Greek deities Apollo and Helios. There is a nice description that comes from a Roman catalog, coin catalog. It says, by promoting the cult and consolidation of divine power into Sol, Roman emperors were able to please the military and also enhance their own power by identifying Sol as the source of their imperial legitimacy. In some cases, the emperors were able to promote themselves as the personification of Sol on earth. The radiate crown, which is better seen here on the slide, was worn by many emperors on their coin portraits during the 3rd century AD. And it is thought by some historians as alluding to the evolving solar connection to the emperor's power. Constantine in this coin is not wearing this crown, but he is next to the deity who is. And as pointed out previously, Constantine could have equated the Christian God with the sun god, or the sun. So it's extremely hard to know if he was a henotheist in the strict sense. But those who worshipped Sol Invictus only were, and the cult was quite popular during the time of Constantine. And this particular coin was minted only less than a year after Constantine's victory over Maxentius in the Battle of the Milvian Bridge. So there is a certain mystery about this coin, because if we look at the two vision theory, are scholars who have argued for Constantine having had this dream experience the night before the Battle of the Milvian Bridge, which had been interpreted as having Christian symbolism. It's really hard to make sense of why the sun god of the imperial cults would be minted in this coin so soon afterwards. It's just another sticking point in these theories that have come from scholarship, but it's very obvious that it would be hard to make any sense of this using Lactantius's account, and some other suggestions could be made about these sorts of difficulties, but I haven't come any in my research. Okay, so this is a translation of the later Nicene Creed. Excuse me if I didn't pronounce that right. Called the Constantinopolitan form, that comes from the second we'll just skip over that council, which was held in Constantinople in 381. The original was first adopted at the First Council of Nicaea in 325 AD. That was convoked or sponsored by Constantine a year after he had been declared the sole emperor of Rome in 324. This event was not a small one by any means. 1,800 bishops of the Christian Church within Rome were invited to attend, and many others as well. The idea was to have delegates come to represent every region of the empire. And set in the agenda was the Arian controversy, a doctrinal dispute that had arose at the time about the nature of Christ and his relation to God the Father. The council, as we see here, declares that the Son was the true God, that Jesus was not made being one substance with the Father. With regards to the issue of the Arian controversy, the two creeds are the same, but for a few additional stipulations and omissions, they are different. But what was set in place from the First Council of Nicaea became Orthodox Christianity, that was eventually declared as the official state religion, and that was established by the Emperor Theodosius I, with the Edict of Thessalonica on February 27th, 380. So, and thereon in, all other forms of Christianity would become heresy. Theodosius was also responsible for closing all pagan and non-Christian, non-Jew, for closing all pagan temples in 391. Just at least the formal. It formally forbade worship in pagan temples. Okay, so I have two rather important pieces that I want to share here. The first is another coin from this one from 334 AD. So this coin would have been circulating after the First Council of Nicaea. if the dating is correct, but what we have here is Constantine on one side, and then on the other is the she-wolf and the twin brothers Romulus and Remus. And the Chi-Rho symbol, which I haven't actually showed yet, but here you can see it above the twins, beside two stars. In Roman mythology, the story of the twins is what tells the events that took place, which led to the founding of the city of Rome. And so the story is rather adventurous, but what happens is Romulus ends up killing his brother, and the city that he built was named for him, Rome. I have so I just want to make note of the way that I've treated the discussion of Constantine so far is that I've done it in a number of, by combining a number of different viewpoints about who Constantine was, using the religious, mythical, factual. But why this item stands out for me is because I think that it takes on a way of characterizing Constantine and the Roman Empire in a way that I haven't been able to come across in my actual readings. But here, the mythological tale that carried Rome through almost all of its history is now absorbed with the symbol of the Christian symbol of the Chi-Rho, which for those who don't know what the symbol signifies is that it combines the two capital letters from the Greek word Christos, so Chi and Rho, and Christos means Christ. I think that this has significance for me because I really believe that if we are to tell the story about Constantine, we are going to have to do so when that includes Rome and all of its history, to actually get an appreciation for the material that we do have now in this contemporary world to study this figure and to actually get a full grasp of our modern scholarly sources who attempt to flesh out the really important details that do matter, but also this aspect of our humanity that accepts the divine, as mysterious and elusive as that really sounds. But it can maybe provide as a compensatory measure to our almost completely inconclusive scholarship on Constantine. The next item I have here is this cameo, a small carving relief. This one is from sardoxin, precious stone. Here is Constantine being wreathed by the Tyche of Constantinople. So Tyche was the deity Fortune, and so Tyche is like a guardian of a city, and Fortune here is the guardian of the city of Constantinople. And in this cameo, Constantine is pictured next to the deity, receiving a crown of wreath to indicate the divine favor of his rule. And here's just the last slide from this section. this coin gives an indication of the mytho-religious imagination of late antiquity. And as I've described in the last slide, that the Taj was the deity of fortune and the guardian of the city Constantinople. All right. In 324 AD, when Constantine became the emperor of Rome, this was after his victory that united the East and Western Empire, and having successfully defeated his final rival, Licinius. As far as what we know of Constantine's faith, what is available to analyze are his own writings. There is one last paper worth mentioning, and that is Timothy Barnes' article, Constantine and the Christians of Persia. So this writing, what it describes for us is it looks at an exchange between Constantine and the Persian king Shapur, and what Barnes argues is that the tension that had arisen on the eastern frontier in the closing years of Constantine's rule as emperor could, on general grounds, have been the natural and inevitable consequence of Constantine's foreign policy to provide protection for Christians outside of the Roman Empire. Just as an important note. And then, okay, so and then our conclusion. So just two characters, Fausta and Chrysippus. Constantine's eldest son, Chrysippus, was from a son from his first wife, Minerva. Fausta and Chrysippus were both killed after Constantine ordered issue for their death in 326 AD, just after becoming the sole emperor of Rome. Minerva was killed in 307 AD because she was the sister of his political rival Maxentius. And and in 325 AD, Constantine had actually killed his sister's husband, his last political rival, Licinius. Sorry, I'm just having trouble pronouncing that. And their son, his nephew, for reasons having to do with succession. And I guess the peace of the Roman Empire, and peace was had within the empire for the 30 years of Constantine's rule as Roman Empire. Relatively speaking, there were no more civil wars going on. And here's an image of Istanbul. So Byzantium was named the new capital of the Roman Empire from 324 to 395 AD, and then was renamed Constantinople in 330 AD. And Constantine rebuilt the city from the years of 324 to 337 AD. And yeah, that's what Constantinople presently looks like. as Istanbul. Thank you.